An elderly woman started singing at a train station, and the crowd recognized her voice after 30 years. In a bustling train station full of life and bustle, time seemed to stand still for one elderly woman. People hurry to go about their business, announcements of train arrivals sound every minute, overlapping the hum of voices and the noise of suitcase wheels. Light streams through the massive glass windows, creating a sense of light haze, and the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe wafts through the air. A woman sits on a wooden bench near the platform. She looks to be in her late 70s. Her face is crowned with wrinkles that seem to hold the story of a lifetime. She is dressed modestly, a dark coat, old but neat shoes, an old leather bag on her knees. Her gray hair is gathered in a low bun, and her eyes are staring off into the distance, through the crowd, as if she's looking for someone or something. People around her pass by without noticing her. Some are hurrying to catch a train, some are buying hot tea from a street vendor. But she doesn't move. Her posture is tense, but there is determination in her eyes. It's as if she's about to do something important, but she doesn't dare. Who is she? Why is she here? The questions remain unanswered, and that only adds to the mystery. The voiceover narrates, at first glance, she's just an old woman, one of hundreds. But this place is special to her. It was here, many years ago, that her biggest dream began and ended. Her hand slowly opens the bag, revealing a small, shabby notebook. She runs her finger over its cover, as if remembering something dear to her heart. Her face changes for a second, a slight smile flashes across her face, but it fades away, replaced by sadness. She raises her head and slowly looks at the people around her. The people, the noise, the station, it all seems alien to her. But a light appears in her eyes. She inhales deeply, as if preparing for an important step. The woman puts the notebook back in her bag, gets up from the bench and takes a few steps forward. Her face becomes serious, she looks at the crowd and suddenly begins to sing. Her voice spills over the station, quiet and uncertain at first. The people around her continue going about their business, but someone starts to turn around. It's not just words, there are memories, pain and hope in her voice. The woman closes her eyes and the music seems to take her back in time. Years ago, she was a real star. Her name was in the newspapers, her voice was on the radio, her concerts were full houses. She grew up in a small town, but her talent was too big for the local scene. From childhood she was taught to sing, and she quickly became a favorite of the local community. When she turned 25, fate smiled upon her wider than she could have imagined. A young producer spotted her at one of the amateur contests and offered her a contract. It was her ticket to the big world. In a few years she became famous throughout the country. Her songs were about love, loss and hope, and every note resonated with people's hearts. At the height of her fame, everything seemed perfect. Beautiful outfits, photos on the covers of magazines, trips to different cities, life was full and bright. But behind the scenes of this brilliance hid problems that no one realized. Everything changed when Ellen began to notice strange things. The producer who was her mentor began to take more and more control over her life. He decided what she should sing, how she should look, who she should date. Ellen felt like a bird in a golden cage. Every time she tried to voice her opinion, she was besieged, "You have to obey. It's for your career." The problems began to mount like a snowball. At one of her concerts, her voice broke. The newspapers immediately picked up the news, "Is the singer losing form?" Ellen tried to ignore the criticism, but her popularity began to fade. The producer demanded even more from her, leaving no room for rest or privacy. It was at this point that she met him, John. He was a pianist, young and talented. Their work together quickly grew into something more. John became her support, a man who believed in her talent without conditions. But the happiness was short-lived. John offered her to leave the producer and start a new life, to sing what she wanted. Ellen hesitated for a long time, but finally made up her mind. She broke the contract, gave up her wealth and went on the road with John. And that's when the real ordeal began. The old producer declared war. He used his connections to close her access to the best scenes. Ellen tried to return to the stage on her own, but her name no longer shone so brightly. She and John began to lose everything they had until they finally found themselves in a small apartment with minimal means of subsistence. The worst of it all happened when John got sick. His illness progressed too quickly, and in a few months Ellen was alone. She lost not only the love of her life, but also her faith in herself. The music that had been her meaning became a source of pain for her. At the train station, she sings this very song, the one she and John wrote together. It's her way of coming back to herself, remembering who she was, and perhaps finding the strength to begin again. After John left, Ellen's life began to resemble a lingering storm. Each day brought new challenges, but she still tried to hang on. Music, which had been her main passion, now seemed distant and unattainable. Everything that used to bring her joy became a reminder of the past, which she could no longer get back. Ellen took a job in a factory to make ends meet. Her hands, used to holding a microphone, were now blistered from the hard work. Her colleagues had no idea that this woman had once been a famous singer. She seemed to them withdrawn and cold, but inside Ellen boiled emotions. Every time she heard music on the radio, her heart clenched. Her songs were no longer playing, her name was gone from the headlines. It was as if she had ceased to exist. Sometimes, in moments of despair, she asked herself, maybe I shouldn't have started in the first place. One of Ellen's most difficult moments was selling John's piano. The instrument had been a symbol to her of their love and shared creativity, but the need for money forced her to make this painful decision. She watched strangers carry the piano out of her small apartment and could not hold back her tears. But even in that moment, there was still a spark of hope in her. Sometimes she would go into the local park with the guitar John had given her for her first concert. She would play her old tunes, but she did it quietly so no one could hear. Music became her secret, her only solace. One day in the park, a young guy with a camera approached her. He heard her singing and offered to record her song. Ellen refused at first, not wanting to reveal herself, but the guy was persistent. He told her he was working on a project about forgotten talents and convinced her to give it a try. Ellen agreed, but made a condition: she didn't want her name on the project. She was afraid that the world would find out how low she had fallen after her glittering past. When the video of her song hit the internet, she didn't even know it. It went viral, millions of people listened to her voice and marveled at its depth. But Ellen remained in the shadows, continuing to work in the factory and live her humble life. And now, years later, she is back at the train station. This place has a special meaning for her. This is where she first spoke in front of a large audience. This is where her career began. She sits on a bench, holding a notebook of old lyrics, and thinks about how her life has changed. Two feelings struggle in her heart: fear and hope. She is afraid of being vulnerable again, but she also realizes that her music can still touch people's hearts. She rises from the bench, takes a deep breath, and begins to sing. Her voice, tentative at first, gradually becomes stronger. It's not just singing, it's the cry of her soul. The notes fill the train station, mingling with the noise of everyday life. But soon the noise fades. People begin to stop, to look around. Some of the passengers, passing by, linger, others put aside their phones and start listening. It's not a professional concert, not a perfectly constructed performance. But there is something about Ellen's voice that makes people forget everything they've done up to that point. A young girl with a suitcase stops in the middle of the platform, a man in a business suit takes off his headphones, a child pulls his mother by the arm to pay attention. People begin to come closer. Their faces express surprise and admiration. Some take pictures on their phones, others just stand there as if mesmerized. The atmosphere changes, the noise of the station is replaced by silence, broken only by her voice. Ellen sings a song that was written many years ago, but its words sound relevant even today. It is a song about love, loss, hope, something that is familiar to everyone. She sings to herself, but it seems that her voice reaches every heart. After a few minutes, someone in the crowd begins to whisper. Her face, slightly altered by time, seems vaguely familiar. Someone says, "That's her. That's the same Ellen." Others don't believe it, but start searching the internet. The first comments sound incredulous. "No way, she disappeared 30 years ago." The more people recognize her, the more the excitement grows. A crowd gathers around. Someone exclaims loudly, "That's her voice. I remember that song." People begin to applaud right in the middle of the station, and some even cry, moved by her performance. Ellen opens her eyes and sees dozens of faces in front of her. They are smiling, applauding, filming her on cameras. In their eyes she sees not pity, but sincere admiration. She didn't expect such a response, her heart beats faster. Tears flow down her cheeks, but they are tears of joy. She feels that she has been accepted again, that her voice is still important to people. Her performance comes to an end. The crowd erupts in applause, someone shouts, "Bravo!" But Ellen isn't looking for fame. She just smiles and thanks the audience for hearing her. After the performance is over, the crowd does not disperse. People come up to Ellen, thanking her, sharing their emotions. Some tell how her songs helped them through difficult times, others recall listening to her with their families many years ago. But in the midst of all these faces, one suddenly appears that gives her a strange feeling. A man in his 60s, in a strict coat and with graying temples, stands aside, hesitating to approach. His eyes are filled with warmth and sadness at the same time. Ellen notices him and feels something click in her mind. She moves closer and he speaks softly, "Ellen. Do you remember me?" It's Gerard, her longtime friend and manager who worked with her in the early years of her career. He was the one who once supported her at her first gigs, was there for her when she doubted herself. But their paths parted after she left show business. He tried to find her, but to no avail. His eyes filled with genuine admiration and relief. "I knew you'd come back. I knew your voice couldn't just disappear," he says. Ellen, touched by his words, smiles through her tears. Gerard tells her that he now works in a small music studio and helps young talent. He suggests that she meet to discuss the possibility of recording her songs. Ellen doesn't immediately respond. Her heart is drawn to music, but her fear of repeating the past is still strong. "Gerard, I am no longer the Ellen you remembered. My life has changed a lot," she replies. But he only shakes his head. "You've always been you, and your voice confirms it." The crowd begins to disperse, but a few people remain to take pictures with her and thank her for her performance. Ellen feels the weight of responsibility weighing on her shoulders. She can no longer hide, she is recognized, she is heard again. In the evening, back home, Ellen sits at John's old guitar for a long time. Her thoughts return to his words, to their shared dream of music that touches people's hearts. She realizes that that day at the train station was a turning point. Her phone rings. It's Gerard. He asks her to give their conversation a chance. Ellen decides she needs to take a chance. After all, this isn't just a chance to bring music back into her life, it's an opportunity to be herself again. Ellen sat at her old kitchen table, holding a ragged piece of paper. It was one of her first songs, written when she was young. Her heart trembled with excitement, but a faint flame of hope burned inside. The next day she was to meet with Gerard to discuss her return to music. As Ellen walked through the streets of the city, memories came over her like a wave. In the past, she had stepped confidently onto the stage, feeling the support of thousands of audience members. Now she was on her way to the studio, where everything would have to start all over again. She was afraid that her voice was no longer the same, that no one would want to listen to her anymore. But she knew this was her chance. Gerard met her at the door of the small, cozy studio. "Ellen, I'm glad you came. I'm sure you won't regret it," he said with a warm smile. Inside, the studio was simple but very atmospheric: wooden walls, acoustic panels, pianos and old microphones. When Ellen picked up her guitar and played the first chord, there was silence in the room. Gerard and his crew looked at her expectantly. She began to sing, tentatively at first, then louder and louder. Her voice sounded the same as it had then, years ago, but with new shades of experience and pain. Gerard, closing his eyes, smiled. "That's what we've all been missing. Your voice, Ellen, is something incredible," he said when she finished singing. The team applauded, and Ellen felt the confidence growing inside her. For several hours Ellen worked on recording her first song in 30 years. It was the same song she had sung at the train station. Gerard suggested adding some modern instruments, but leaving her unique style intact. When the recording was complete, Gerard showed her the result. Ellen couldn't believe her ears. It was her, but in a new light. Her voice sounded powerful, sincere and deep. She realized that her time had not yet passed. Gerard suggested putting the song on the internet to test people's reactions. Ellen thought long and hard, but finally agreed. "If it inspires at least one person, then it's not all for nothing," she said. The video, recorded in the studio, was their first step. That evening, Ellen sat at home, cup of tea in hand, and watched the number of views of her song skyrocket. People's comments were full of admiration and support. Her story was once again an inspiration to others. It had only been a week, but Ellen's life had changed. Her song posted on the internet became a real sensation. People wrote in the comments that her voice touched them to the core. Some shared stories of their lives, finding comfort and support in her music. Ellen read each post and cried, but now they were tears of joy. After the success of the song, Gerard began to receive many offers from producers and music venues. Some wanted to organize concerts, others wanted to release an album. But Ellen was still hesitant. She was afraid to be in the center of attention again, to lose herself, as it was before. Gerard, sensing her doubts, suggested organizing a small live concert in a chamber setting. It would help her feel comfortable and see if she was ready to return to the big stage. Ellen agreed. The concert was held in a cozy hall with soft lighting and wooden seats. It was attended by those who were inspired by her story. The audience waited anxiously for Ellen to take the stage. She could feel the excitement, but as soon as she took the microphone, the fear disappeared. She started with the very song that was her comeback and then performed some old hits. Her voice sounded sincere, warm, and everyone in the audience felt that she was singing just for them. The audience gave her a standing ovation, and some even cried. After the concert, several people approached Ellen. Among them was a woman with a picture of Ellen singing on one of her first stages. "I was at that concert. "You have no idea how your music back then helped me through a difficult time," the woman said with tears in her eyes. Another man, an older man, appeared to have been a fan since the beginning of her career. He was holding a vinyl record signed by her that he had kept for over 30 years. "I knew you'd come back," he said, barely concealing his emotions. That evening was the beginning of a new chapter in Ellen's life. She realized that her music could still inspire and bring joy to people. She was no longer afraid that her past would come back, because now she knew how to deal with it. Gerard suggested she record an album, and Ellen agreed. But this time she decided to do things her own way, no pressure, no chasing success. The main thing for her is to share her music with those who need it. Ellen and Gerard immersed themselves in working on the album. She wrote several new songs inspired by the events of the past few months. Each was filled with personal experiences and sincere emotions. Gerard insisted on keeping the arrangements minimalist, emphasizing the strength of her voice and the creative atmosphere. Ellen felt freer and more confident than ever before. Every chord, every line was filled with her soul. The musicians working on the album were also touched by her story and gave their best. One of the songs was dedicated to her late husband John. She sang it with such emotion that even the sound engineer couldn't hold back the tears. It was a song about love, loss, and hope that resonated with everyone who heard it. When the album was ready, Gerard suggested organizing a presentation evening. They chose an unusual place, a small theater with a vintage atmosphere. Tickets sold out in a few days. People came not only for the music, but also for the story, which they knew through the internet. At the evening, Ellen performed several songs live. Her voice sounded powerful and deep. The hall was quiet, people listened with bated breath. After each song there was applause that grew louder and louder. At the end of the evening the hall exploded with applause, and many people could not hold back tears. After the release, the album became a real hit. It was discussed in social networks, radio stations played her songs, and critics wrote rave reviews. Ellen was once again in the spotlight, but this time she felt differently. Now her fame was no longer a burden, but an opportunity to share her story. She received an invitation to perform at a major benefit concert. It was an opportunity to remind people once again that her story is not only about giving back, but also about the power of believing in yourself.